Welcome back to FireWatch Live. This is Tom DeSorcy, and once again, we're joined by Scott Metzler. In our first session, we talked about how leadership is about people, and certainly the importance of focusing on the human element. Well, today we're going to dive into something just as impactful: how anyone, anywhere, at any time can exercise leadership. You don't have to be the boss to lead. We'll explore how simple actions like asking the right questions, helping others grow, and making things better for people can all be considered leadership. Scott will help us to rethink what leadership looks like and showing us that it's not about titles, but it's about actions. And Scott, it's a pleasure to have you back on the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
It seems at the outset, wait a second, it's not rocket science.
That's right.
Have you found in your, first of all, in your I guess in your history, in your dealing with this to the one-on-one with people and in groups and in your presentations, that people are kind of going, wow, it really is kind of, yeah, I can practice this. Is that the case?
That is the case. And, it's not super complicated. Like you say, it's not rocket science, but it's difficult to do because it sort of challenges the way that we've conditioned ourselves to think about leadership. And so for, generations, I think we've trained people to look to leaders to have the answers to our questions and the solutions to our problems. And when we sort of renegotiate that relationship, we find that, really great leadership often gets the environment right where we can all sort of contribute to those solutions and answers.
It's not always about wearing the white hat. We've talked about that, or the stripes, or whatever organization you're with, and being that leader is it about practice? I guess, is that what we're talking about?
I think it is. I think it is. And so, the idea comes from the adaptive leadership framework, and so the work of Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky in the mid 1980s. This language, anybody can do it anytime, anywhere. I've borrowed from the Kansas Leadership Center, and it really gets to the root of this idea of reimagining what leadership could be and what leadership should be, especially in this highly complex and complicated world we find ourselves in. It seems to me that it's fairly obvious these days, no one person could be expected to or should be expected to have all the answers. So leadership is sort of a team sport.
The good thing about doing presentations, I think, and it's like to have one-on-one conversation when you're talking to a group of people. And you bring this topic up in this forum and talk about anyone can lead anytime, anywhere. What's the reaction you get?
Right. Well, so the reaction is often mixed. And so, for people who might be gray in the beard and long in the tooth like me, that might seem like unwelcome news because, folks from my generation have been conditioned to understand leadership as authority. And what we now know is that those two things are very different. We need authority figures to do things from their positions of power. And we also need people to exercise leadership from all levels of an organization. And so what I typically find is the younger the person in the audience, the better this news seems to be, because one of the things that data is showing us is that the younger the worker in the workplace, the more they really want to find ways to meaningfully contribute and to exercise leadership.
Do you see, or do you find that it's about a realization from these people?
A lot of times it is. And again, we've spent generations conditioning ourselves to think about leadership one way. And, it could be, 150 years ago, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, leadership worked that way, where there was one person at the top of an organization who knew everything there was to know. But today, that's just not the case. There's enough leadership opportunity for all of us to pick up a little bit.
You write and you speak about the value of reframing leadership behaviors. I want to talk about that, and maybe you can explain a bit more about that.
You bet. You bet. So, it occurs to me that if leadership is an activity rather than a position, that, one of the first things we ought to do is define those activities. And so, one way I think to recognize leadership behavior is to look at the people who recognize a need and don't walk past it. So they're willing to take action to make things better for other people. And that last part I think is really important. So it's one thing to take action to make things better for me. I think it's an act of love and an act of leadership to sort of invest myself and to risk something to make things better for you and for others around.
Should you try to be a leader? I mean, is that something, a conscious decision to make, even though you're not in charge?
I think yes. So the answer is probably mixed. And so I think there are people for whom this just makes intuitive sense. They just come to this naturally. Maybe it's a condition of how they were raised or how they're wired. But there are other people for whom it is a conscious decision. And for both of those kinds of people, it's tough, risky work. So when we agree to step into a position where change is possible, that can be risky, that can be scary. If we become the face of that change, sometimes we become a target when we're associated with, making things a little less comfortable for folks.
Should you intend to lead? And I guess this goes back to the beginning, where I talked about anyone can do it anytime, anywhere, but there's, I guess, intention, or you're trying to lead. What about those that aren't really trying to lead, but just sort of doing it?
Yeah. It occurs to me that in modern organizations, formal leaders, and so people who do have the white hat, who do have the things on their collar, should be always on the lookout to recognize and reward those behaviors of leadership where we find them. So the way that leadership gets baked into the DNA of an organization is to sort of reframe the way we define leadership and to reframe the way we talk about leadership. And one of the things I notice oddly in my travels and in my practice is by and large, humans don't do a great job of talking about leadership. So I think that's one of the opportunities for us.
I like when you say that when we identify things like this as leadership behavior, right? Leadership behavior, we begin to reinvent the language of leadership. Explain that. I mean, the language of leadership, it sounds like this is something I've got to study.
Well, yeah. And so, again, it's something that's not super complicated, but it's important. And sometimes it's hard to do. And so, one of the things that in my former department, where I grew up in the fire service, we came to a place where we had to really get clear about what leadership looks like and then what we were going to do about it. And so often in hyper-masculine cultures like law enforcement, like the fire service, we reward first to the door and first through the door behaviors. And so this aggressive sort of approach to the work that we do. And oftentimes that bleeds over from emergency response activities to all activities. And so what we decided at some point was leadership looks like people who are willing to walk to the door of opportunity, and rather than kicking it down and rushing into it themselves, looking around and considering who might this be a great opportunity for, who might be a great match for this specific opportunity, and then helping those folks develop the skills and the capacity to walk through the door first while we hold it open for them. And so we defined leadership in our language as door holders. So when we found the door holders, we knew those were the special people in our organization, and we uh, recognized those behaviors and rewarded those behaviors.
And you and I come from, certainly the fire background, and we will relate, and certainly our viewers, listeners will relate if they're from that background. But certainly you speak to an audience that's much broader than that in terms of, we use the term organizations, in business or in what have you. It could be in volunteer work in organizations that you could exercise leadership behavior. Let's turn the table, and you say it's important for anyone, anytime, anywhere. What about those that are in that leadership position? And I think you've just alluded to that recognizing who will be the next leader or who has the properties that are leading without them even knowing it.
That's right. That's right. And so, succession planning, I think, is an important part of organizational growth and continuity. Sometimes I think it gets short shrift. And so, I think being really clear about what it is an organization values and what it is that's going to carry an organization into the future in healthy ways is really an important part of succession planning, and recognizing those behaviors and just giving language and attention to those behaviors, I think, is a good first step in building the future of an organization.
When you refer to organizational door holding, and we talked about earlier the leadership behaviors, and one of the other leadership behaviors was the asking great questions, and that kind of speaks to me in terms of trying to ask great questions or having a conversation. But I find myself, and maybe it's my broadcasting background, I tend to do that every day.
Right, right. So again, I'm going to take a half step backwards and talk about the way we've been conditioned to think about leaders and leadership. And so one of the sort of hallmarks of old school leadership is to think about leaders as having the answers. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to question established leaders, to identify and ask those questions. Sometimes that's scary because there might be a little bit of pushback, right? So who's comfortable questioning the boss? And so a leadership behavior, I think, from the top down, is the ability to sort of disengage our ego from our leadership position and to get the environment and the culture healthy enough that those questions are viewed as progress and health of an organization, and not necessarily challenging seniority or leadership or authority.
It's an interesting term, conditioned. It speaks to the fact that well, we talked about it last time. We talked about generations and change. And will there ever be a time that the condition is the anyone, anytime, anywhere principle?
Right, right. I think that is our aspirational future. And so certainly we're not there yet. Will we ever be there 100%? I don't know. But I have seen in my practice of leadership a real shift in organizational understanding of what leadership is, and this idea that we're better when we have lots of smart people exercising leadership regardless of their authority. So when leadership becomes teamwork, when leadership becomes a team sport, leadership necessarily gets better.
So are you saying don't be afraid to step up?
I'm saying don't be afraid to step up, but I'm also saying don't pretend like it's not risky work, because it is. Leadership is hard, leadership can be lonely, and leadership can be risky, especially if we're helping people make progress on challenges that are near and dear to their hearts. So when we ask people to think differently and behave differently and perhaps believe differently, often that can be a risky proposition.
We referred to, we talked earlier about recognizing leadership behavior, and that in terms of a current leader seeing someone who has the potential. What about now more about the person recognizing that in themselves, listening to this, seeing this today, and maybe going, hey, yeah, that could be me.
Right.
How important is that recognition in yourself?
I think it's critically important. And so, one real key behavior of leadership from whatever level is, the idea of self-awareness. And so I remember um, coming to an awareness that, gosh, I wonder if someday I could be a leader. And as I learned a bit more about this idea of relational leadership and distributed leadership, I began to recognize some of those sort of, uh, small leadership kernels of leadership truths in myself. And so that's an important part of the leadership journey. But equally important is this idea of mentoring leadership and sponsoring emerging leaders.
When you say reward appropriate leadership behavior, I think that goes both ways in terms of a leader rewarding someone, but also rewarding myself by the again that recognition. Am I speaking correctly?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And it goes back to this idea of self-awareness and this idea of recognizing these behaviors for what they are, recognizing that they are valuable, recognizing that even though they're hard and risky, they're necessary to the health of an organization and to the health of the individual leader.
Do you think it's easier to be a leader when you're not in charge? When you're leading, you're telling people, you're taking initiative, but you're not really responsible. You're not really, you don't know, you don't think about it maybe, or is it just hey, the result of my actions will just lead these people down the trail. But at the end of the day, I'm not really in charge to make sure it's done to a certain extent. Am I speaking off the top of my head here?
Yeah, no, I think that's a real that's a real thing. And so, one of the opportunities that we have when we sort of renegotiate how we talk about leadership. And so, I think one of the things we talked about last time is the way you change a culture is to change its language first. And so when we start to recognize those leadership skills, when we start to develop language around it, shared language, so that, when I say adaptive leadership, everybody knows exactly what we're talking about here. I think, one of those things that we can start to sort of build into the practice of leadership, especially emerging leaders, is that you are responsible for the results. Maybe, especially if you don't have authority, right? So if we're in this all together, we've got to be in it all together all the way.
When you recognize you're part of the team, I guess.
You bet. You bet. And so, yeah, there's a big difference between the idea of being a high level achiever, part of a team, and being actually someone who agrees to exercise leadership. And so, for a long time, maybe for the first 10 years or so of my fire service career, I didn't know the difference. And so, all of the classes, all of the achievements, all of the things I did were to bring credit to me, which really didn't help the team all that much. And so it wasn't until I kind of discovered this idea that a leader's job is to invest in the success of other people. Sometimes that comes at a cost. Sometimes that's a sacrifice on my part to make sure that you have what you need to succeed. When that happens, the team is stronger, the organization's stronger, and we're all just a little bit more healthy.
Personally, did you then, or have you looked back and realized that at one point you were, I guess, not on purpose, but you actually were the door holder?
Yes, but where I thought this question was going was, did I look back and recognize that I was part of the problem? And so that might be a more interesting answer. And so, absolutely, I was part of the problem. And I remembered, like, I can see the shift, and it wasn't overnight. It took some time, because again, if I am investing in the growth and the success of others, often that can feel like a zero-sum game. So if you're winning, that means I'm not, so I must be losing. And so, the trick there, and the big lift is to sort of recognize that that's not the case. If I can disengage my ego and see myself as a part of a healthy whole, then anything we do to make one of us better makes all of us better.
So problem or otherwise, and that sheer fact that you're able to, the leaders, the current leaders, anyone can be a leader, but hey, I'm the leader now, and I'm recognizing that behavior in a leader, but are they recognizing the behavior that I am a leader as well? How do you
Right.
know? How do you know when they recognize you as the leader? Just because you're wearing the white hat, they're supposed to. But at the end of the day, how are they recognizing you as the leader?
Right. That's a great question. And I think that's a function of normalizing the language that we use around leadership, normalizing just having those conversations. I'm surprised, even today, how many places I end up where there's just some resistance and some reluctance around having leadership conversations. So having those conversations and then having what I call macro conversations. So we're going to talk about how we're going to talk about leadership, right? And so I think a part of that conversation has to be just because anybody can do it anytime from any position doesn't mean we don't need authority figures. So, there is a time and a place for the authority figure to stand tall, to give direction, and for everybody else to fall in line. And so, those two ideas aren't mutually exclusive. So, part of the conversation is figuring out how we're going to navigate sort of, both ends of the spectrum where everybody can lead, everybody should lead. I'm asking everybody to lead, but at the same time, I am the formal authority figure. And here's how those roles and responsibilities differ. Here's how they kind of blend together.
We use the term a lot: practice leadership, practice behavior. That's our language in the fire world, at least. We understand practice, we understand training, but we understand practice, which
Right.
which are hand in hand and sort of two different things, where it becomes muscle memory. Is that what we're trying to instill in future leaders?
I think it is. Yeah. So the more we do this, the more we're going to get it right. But the idea of a practice is sort of this idea that we're not always going to get it right. And so I think an important piece of effective leadership, whether you're a big L leader with stuff on your hat or a small L leader without any rank or authority, is the willingness to extend and receive grace around leadership. The willingness to say, you know what, we're going to do our very best, but we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. When that happens, here's how we're going to behave. We're not going to marginalize people. We're not going to make fun of people. We're not going to punish people for failing as long as we're learning and we're moving in the right direction and we're directed by the mission, the vision, and the values. If those things are in alignment, failure just means we're going to try again another way. And an active leadership, again, big L leadership or a little L leadership, is we're going to pick each other up and we're going to move on down the road.
We are encouraging people anytime, anywhere, to anyone to be a leader. Let's turn the table a bit here, and you said the big L and the small L. How important should big L encourage little L?
I think if we're going to get the culture right and the environment healthy enough for leadership to bubble up from all levels, the big L leaders, those authority figures in the room, have to normalize this behavior, have to identify it for what it is. And so, one of the worst feelings in the world, I think, is doing these risky leadership behaviors, exposing yourself to the hard work and the scrutiny that comes along with exercising leadership without authority, only to learn that that's not the game we're playing, right? And so everybody has to be on the same page. The rules of engagement, the way we're going to behave with each other have to be explicitly stated.
And then you will know that leader exists within your organization.
Absolutely, you bet.
I often say in one of my many mantras, in that, I get looked upon as being a leader for so many years, again, wearing the white hat, that people expect me to lead. My attitude is in a non-emergency situation, I don't care who's in charge, just as long as someone is.
Right.
How important
Right.
is it to actually have someone be in charge?
I think it's incredibly important for someone to be in charge. And so, those managerial functions, those authority functions, we have to take those things seriously, especially as our leadership transitions into crisis leadership, right? So, when fire is blowing out of the second story window, that's not a great time to talk about feelings. That's not a great time to have a focus group conversation or to take a vote. Somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to give the orders, and the rest of us need to carry out those orders. Right. But when we're not doing crisis leadership, that's a great time for us to sort of develop the practice and to normalize the practice of leadership and to let those folks who don't have authority get a little experience, have a little practice.
I'm interested in the people you meet across North America that, for example, speaking in the fire world still, where you'll send, maybe a search and rescue crew in a team into a building. And again, you're outside of the white hat. The big L is not standing over top of you, but you've got a senior person or an officer or what have you. They are a leader. They've taken on that leadership role. Have you ever talked to these people and say, do you realize that you're a leader? Do you realize that you were in charge in there?
You bet. You bet. So, one of the sort of timeless leadership truths is this idea that when you exercise leadership without authority, that necessarily requires you to sort of operate at the edge of your authority and perhaps step a toe over it from time to time. And so, that's why this is scary work. That's why it's risky work. Sometimes people have to, push on the bounds of their authority in order to exercise good leadership.
Are you, again, I think we've touched on this previously, but again, recognizing that you are the leader, and again, or is it safer, or is it better that you're just leading and not purposely trying to?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, we say that anyone can lead, but then there's got to be a conscious decision to say, well, I'm in charge of this little group of people. Or are you just sort of doing it without even realizing it?
Yeah, I think both of those things can be true. And so, again, this kind of gets back to this idea of normalizing the conversation and sort of solidifying the language that we use, right? And so, when there is a need for an authority figure to assume that authority role, everybody needs to fall in line. When there's an opportunity or an expectation that everyone leads, that can be a different story. So here's an example from my old life, from my time in the fire department. And so as a chief officer, I had discretion over our budget. And there were folks who thought we didn't have enough money, folks within our organization, I wish we could purchase this. How come we don't have a new fire truck? All of the things. And so I felt like those questions were kind of an affront to my authority, right? So I'm the big L leader. I've got the white hat. I'm in charge of the budget. Almost, how dare you question how we're spending our money? And once I was able to sort of divorce my ego from that and let other people in and share some of this information, some of our little L leaders, so people without rank, people without authority, said, "Hey, boss, I'm willing to help. What can I do?" And so, here's the solution to the problem of we don't have enough money. We identified 3 or 4 people without authority who were interested and able to attend grant writing schools. And so we developed a budget support team. And so these non-officers, non-authoritarian figures were writing grants and finding money and winning grants to help supplement our budget. And so, when that money came into the organization, those people were invited to decide how we spent that money. And so, democratizing information, flattening the hierarchy a little bit, giving up some control, really helped us make progress towards some of our really important challenges.
Wow. Wow, that's an excellent example.
Thank
Scott, I
you.
thank you for this again. It's been a pleasure. That'll wrap up our second session here of Firewatch Live. I hope you're starting to see that leadership isn't something reserved for people at the top. It's something anyone can do every day. In our next session, we'll take a closer look at the power of relationships in leadership. We'll explore how strong connections within teams and organizations can make all the difference in how leadership plays out. Can't wait to have you with us for that. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.